You've been taught to believe that abundance is something you have to chase, something you earned through years of effort, discipline, sacrifice, something that sits far ahead of you, waiting at the end of a long road paved with hard work, strategy, and persistence. But what if that entire idea is flawed from the start? What if wealth isn't something you pursue at all? What if the very act of chasing it is the reason it keeps slipping further away, like trying to catch your own shadow as it stretches out in front of you? Take a moment and look at your life right now. There's probably a gap somewhere. Maybe it shows up in your bank account. Maybe it's in the opportunities that never seem to land in your direction. Maybe it's that quiet frustration of watching others move forward while you feel stuck in place. You've tried to close that gap. You've followed the advice, built the vision boards, repeated affirmations, immersed yourself in the culture of hustle, early mornings, late nights, constant motion. And yet, something still feels off. The abundance you've been working toward feels distant, almost unreachable, like it exists in a different reality entirely, one you can see but not enter. And here's the part most people never hear. The reason things haven't shifted isn't because you're not trying hard enough. It's because the approach itself is built on a misunderstanding of how abundance actually works. Think about holding water in your hand. If you clench your fist tightly, trying to control it, what happens? It escapes. It slips through the cracks between your fingers. But if you relax your hand, if you hold it gently, without force, the water stays. It gathers. It settles. Abundance behaves the same way. And yet, most people approach it with tension, with urgency, with that constant internal pressure to make something happen. You've probably noticed something that doesn't quite make sense. The people who seem to attract money effortlessly aren't the ones obsessing over it every second of the day. They're not constantly checking their accounts. They're not lying awake at night calculating every possible outcome. There's a certain lightness to them, a kind of ease. And it's easy to assume that ease comes after they become wealthy, but it's actually the other way around. That ease is what allows wealth to enter in the first place. Now, I know that might sound unrealistic, like one of those overly simplified, just think positive ideas that ignores real-world challenges. But this isn't about pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about understanding something deeper that's happening beneath the surface of your actions. Every single day, you're sending out signals, not metaphorically, literally. Your nervous system, your thoughts, your emotional patterns, they're constantly generating a kind of internal state that shapes how you interact with the world. When you operate from stress, from lack, from the feeling that something is missing, you're reinforcing a very specific message. I don't have enough. I am not enough. And the world tends to mirror that state back to you. Not because it's punishing you, but because your perception, your decisions, and your energy are all aligned with that belief. Here's where it becomes even more important. You can't fake abundance. You can't repeat affirmations you don't believe and expect them to override what you actually feel. You can't visualize a life that feels completely disconnected from your reality and expect your system to accept it as truth. Because your subconscious is always paying attention. It knows the difference between performance and genuine alignment. So the question becomes, if chasing doesn't work, what does? How do you shift from constantly reaching to naturally receiving? The answer isn't complicated, but it does require you to do something that feels completely counterintuitive. You have to recognize abundance right now. Not later, not when everything finally falls into place. Now, exactly where you are. Look around you for a moment. The fact that you're reading this means you have access to technology, to information, to a level of connectivity that didn't exist for most of human history. That's not neutral, that's abundance. You have the ability to think, to reflect, to understand complex ideas. That's abundance. Your body is functioning in ways you don't even consciously manage. Your breath, your heartbeat, your senses, all working together without effort. That's abundance. But your mind tends to dismiss all of this because it doesn't match the specific version of abundance you've been conditioned to chase. You've created a mental image, a number, a lifestyle, a certain kind of security. And anything that doesn't match that image gets labeled as not enough. That's where the trap begins. Because the more you focus on what's missing, the more you reinforce the experience of lack. The more attention you give to the distance between where you are and where you think you should be, the more you anchor yourself in that very gap. You're not just noticing scarcity, you're practicing it, reinforcing it, strengthening it every time you replay the story of not enough in your mind. It's like trying to get in shape while constantly focusing on how out of shape you are. Every thought, every emotion, every internal reaction keeps you rooted in the identity you're trying to leave behind. And this is where the real shift begins. Not when your circumstances change, but when your relationship to them does. Abundance isn't a destination you arrive at someday. It's a state you recognize and access now. Not because you're ignoring reality, but because you're finally seeing more of it. There's a pattern that shows up again and again in people who experience sudden, unexpected breakthroughs, especially when it comes to money. Right before things change, something inside them relaxes. They stop gripping so tightly. They stop making their happiness dependent on an outcome that hasn't happened yet. They don't give up, they let go. There's a difference. Giving up comes from defeat. Letting go comes from trust. They reach a point where, even if nothing changes immediately, they find a way to feel okay. Not perfect, not ecstatic, just okay. And that internal shift changes everything. Because here's the truth most people overlook. You don't attract what you chase, you embody what you embody. If your internal state is defined by pressure, fear, urgency, then everything you do carries that signature. And that signature shapes your decisions, your communication, your timing, even what you notice and what you miss. But when you start operating from a place of enoughness, even in small moments, you begin to shift that signal. So how do you actually do that when your external reality doesn't seem to support it? You start small. You don't try to convince yourself that everything is perfect. You acknowledge what's real without attaching meaning that limits you. Yes, maybe your finances aren't where you want them to be. That's a fact. But that fact doesn't define your future. It doesn't define your worth. It doesn't define what's possible next. A cloudy day doesn't erase the sun. It just hides it temporarily. Abundance works the same way. It doesn't disappear. It gets obscured by where your attention is focused. So instead of trying to leap into some grand feeling of wealth, you begin with something simple. Find one thing, just one, that genuinely feels good or meaningful to you right now. Not something you should be grateful for, something you actually are. It could be the warmth of a drink in your hands, a moment of laughter you had earlier, the feeling of fresh air when you step outside, something small but real. And for a few seconds, let yourself fully experience it. No analysis, no comparison, just presence. What you're doing in that moment is subtle but powerful. You're teaching your system what enough feels like. And that feeling is very different from what most people expect. It's not intense. It's not overwhelming. It's calm, open, spacious. It feels like exhaling after holding tension for too long. And the more you return to that state, even briefly, the more it begins to reshape how you experience everything else. Something interesting starts to happen.
You begin to notice opportunities you would have overlooked before, not because they suddenly appeared out of nowhere, but because you're finally in a state where you can perceive them. When you're locked in stress or scarcity, your mind narrows its focus. It becomes fixated on the problem. Everything else fades into the background. It's a survival mechanism. But when that pressure softens, your awareness expands. You start to see connections, ideas, possibilities that were always there, just outside your field of view. I've seen this play out in real situations. Someone spends months feeling stuck, sending applications, getting no response, watching their confidence slowly erode. Every day reinforces the same belief: nothing is working. Then something shifts internally, not in their circumstances, but in how they relate to them. They stop obsessing over outcomes. They take a step back. They reconnect with simple, grounded parts of their life. They cook. They rest. They engage with people without an agenda. And within days, something unexpected happens. An opportunity appears, a message, a connection, something they didn't force. Did they magically create it? Not exactly. They became available to it because they were no longer operating from desperation. And that distinction matters more than most people realize.
This isn't about luck. And it's not about pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. What's really happening is much more grounded than that. When you're in a constant state of pressure, mentally jumping between fear and hope, overthinking every move, you create noise, internal noise. And that noise interferes with everything: your clarity, your decisions, your ability to recognize what's actually in front of you. But when you begin to settle, even slightly, something shifts. You become coherent, clear, and clear signals get responses. That doesn't mean you stop taking action. You still handle your responsibilities. You still apply, create, build, move forward. But you do it from a different place, not from panic, not from the feeling that everything depends on this one outcome, but from a grounded sense that you already have value, that you're not trying to prove your worth, just express it. And people can feel that difference. Opportunities respond to that difference. Even your own creativity works differently when it's not under constant threat. You think more clearly. You choose more effectively. You stop undermining yourself in subtle ways you didn't even realize were happening. Now here's something that might be uncomfortable to hear, but it's important. If the money hasn't arrived yet, there may be a part of you that's resisting it. Not consciously. On the surface, you might feel ready. You might believe you're doing everything right. But underneath that, there can be hidden beliefs running quietly in the background. Beliefs like, money changes people. Wealth creates distance. If I have more, I'll lose something else. Or even, I'm not sure I deserve it. These aren't always obvious. They don't always show up clearly. But they shape your behavior, your choices, and your level of openness more than you think. They act like an invisible barrier, one that no amount of effort can break through if it's left unexamined. So the real work isn't just external, it's internal. It's sitting with yourself long enough to notice what you actually believe. Not what you say you believe, not what sounds good, but what genuinely feels true when you're alone with your thoughts. Because those beliefs define the limits of what you allow into your life. The moment you begin to see them clearly, something changes. You're no longer stuck repeating the same patterns without understanding why. You step into a different role. Not someone reacting to circumstances, but someone shaping them. An architect, not a pursuer.
And architects don't chase results. They design conditions. Right now, in this moment, you already have access to everything you need to begin shifting. Not because everything around you is perfect, but because the shift starts within your perception, your state, your awareness. The real question isn't whether abundance exists, it's whether you're ready to stop blocking it. Because in many cases, the biggest obstacle hasn't been the outside world. It's been the constant reinforcement of the idea that something is missing, that you are missing something, when in reality, you've been standing in the middle of more than enough, just unable to recognize it through the lens you were using. And once that lens changes, everything else begins to follow. Gradually, naturally, without force. So instead of chasing, start noticing. Instead of forcing, start allowing. Instead of waiting for abundance to arrive, begin recognizing where it already exists. Because the moment you truly experience that, not intellectually, but internally, you stop being someone who is trying to get there. You become someone who is already there, just expanding. And from that place, things move differently. Faster sometimes, unexpectedly, but always in alignment with the state you're holding. This is the shift. From tension to openness, from lack to awareness, from chasing to receiving. And once it clicks, even briefly, you realize something that changes everything. Abundance was never something you had to find. It was something you had to stop resisting.